You're listening to Titular Characters with your host, the adorable Eva Webb.
Let's talk nerdy things like comic books and superheroes with some nerdy peeps, writers, cartoonists, and so much more. Some fun with the lovely and adorable Eva Webb.
Brooke-le is a cosplayer and an artist whose history with art and design dates back to preschool. Bringing characters to life has always been something that's brought her joy. When she leapt into cosplay in 2019, her creativity burst forward, and she's never looked back. When she tells the stories of the characters she loves through cosplay, she also tells a small part of her own story. And today she's here, ready to talk about comics, empowerment, and cosplay as an art form. How are you, Brooke?
Hi, I'm good. I'm so happy to be here and so excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. You are the first cosplayer we've gotten to talk to, and it's just such an interesting art form.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where I had admired it for so long before I actually started. I mean, I've been following cosplayers since I was in high school, and I'm 27 now, so that was actually a while ago. And I remember just being blown away by what people could create. And at the time, I had no idea how anybody was actually doing it. And I remember looking at people who were making these incredible armor builds and sewing these incredible, dresses and thinking, that's so cool, but I could never do that. And as time went on, I continued following those people. And a couple years ago, actually, we're coming up on 2 years in 2019. Me and my partner watched all of Game of Thrones. We'd never, ever watched it before, and we binged all the seasons. And I immediately fell in love with Daenerys, and that's how I ended up getting my username, which is Tatted Khaleesi. And she was the first character I cosplayed, and I jumped in head first and just never looked back. It's kind of an art form where you're doing a lot of different forms of art within it, right? Like you're learning how to paint things and build things and makeup and body paint. It's it's a whole can of worms,
I bet. So what kind of tools does a cosplayer employ?
I think for me, I can speak to armor building and stuff like that because that's more of what I do. I'm not a great seamstress. I would love to take lessons when it's safe to do so again, just because, I mean, the things that people have sewn and have made are just incredible. I just don't have that skill set. But I do have a sewing machine that I use for, stitching small, basic things. But the stuff that I use for armor building is usually brooke-le, which is a thermoplastic. That when you heat it up with a heat gun, which is also an important tool, you can form it into different shapes. And then Eva Foam is also a common one and one that I use a lot to actually physically make the armor. That requires the heat gun as well, and then a Dremel to smooth out the edges and to add texture. And then usually I use a box cutter. But there are a lot of different ways to kind of cut your foam and your brooke-le. It's just kind of up to you with what works best. But I would say those are the basic tools, at least that I use for projects.
What's that moment where you say, "Oh wow, I have to do that"?
It's so funny. I've had so many of those moments, and I wouldn't say it comes down to any one thing. But for me with Daenerys, it was this I felt really connected to her character, and I just really loved her as a character, as so many people did and still do. And so for her, it was one of those where I was like, I feel really connected to her character. I really want to bring that to life. With certain other cosplays I've done, my Wonder Girl, which is now over a year old, which is crazy. And I'm doing a new cosplay for Cassie Sandsmark as Wonder Girl this year. So we've kind of come full circle, but that was a design that I was rereading some comics, and I was never super into Cassie as Wonder Girl, but her design in the New 52 just caught my eye immediately, and I was like, I need to do that. That is such a cool design. And then from there, I started seeking out more about her character, and I ended up falling in love with her. So I feel like for me, it could either be the connection to the characters where that urge to cosplay them comes from, or I could see a really cool design, and then I end up doing all this research and reading and end up loving the character anyway. But I think it can come from, either place. And I think both places are valid. I know some people feel like they can't cosplay a character if they don't know anything about them. And I don't think that's necessarily fair to tell somebody that they can't do. So it's been fun. I've had so many of those things come up recently with DC's Future State, Andy Curry in the Future State Aquaman. I've never read a character and been like, oh my gosh, I feel like that's me. So she immediately was added to the list, and I have ordered supplies for her at this point in time.
One of the ones that you did that I thought was just stunning. I mean, like, oh my God, it was gorgeous. Was your Dove costume from Hawk and Dove.
Oh, thank you so much. That was my second armor build ever, actually. And I loved that costume the moment I saw it. I'd read a little bit of Dove in Birds of Prey runs, but I felt like Minka Kelly's performance of her was just amazing. And the costume design on Titans is incredible as well. That was such a fun project to do, and it was so challenging. But I just put it on again recently just to take some more pictures, and it's one of my most comfortable, and I feel so like confident in it. So I'm so glad you like that one. That's one that's very close to my heart because there was so many challenges during making it, and to have it come out the way it did, I was just so proud.
Or half the fun of Twitter is just watching just the amazing cosplays that people come up with. It's magical.
It really is, and I think that's part of why, I love consuming cosplay content as much as I love creating it and being a part of it, but there's just a few people like Gracie, the cosplay lass, who I like every photo she posts. I'm like, how are you real? Like, oh my gosh. Like, she looks like she walked out of the comics. She just posted those new photos of her Red Sonja, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's actually her. Like, I was just blown away. But it's so fun for me too, I think, as somebody who just enjoys that kind of content, but also somebody who creates it, to see what everybody else is doing, because I've been inspired by so many different people from seeing what they're doing. And it's also great because you can learn from each other. Because it's a huge learning curve when you decide you're gonna, okay, I'm gonna build this piece of armor or this prop, and I'm going to sew this, and I need to learn how to do makeup for that. And it's like, it's nice that there's so many other people trying to kind of do the same thing so you can learn from each other. But it's one of those things where I've been consuming that content for so long that when I finally jumped into creating it, I feel like I had all this pent up enthusiasm, and it was like, okay, I'm ready to go.
Nice. So is making weapons a different skill set than making armor?
So for me, the only prop I've actually made, and I'm thinking as I say that, is that true? But I think it is my big 5 foot 8 inches axe for Artemis Artemis from Red Hood and the Outlaws. And that was the first prop I ever made, like really made. Other ones I've modified or, gotten 3D printed kits and put them together. But I think that's the only big prop I've ever really made. And it's a similar skill set, like the materials are the same. But I do think it's a little bit different in the approach, because in some ways it's easier because you don't have to fit it around your body, which is really nice. You don't have to make sure it's not going to look awkward because you're just going to be holding it. But the trick with it is, if it's a big prop like that axe is, how do you stabilize it so that if you do want to swing it around, it's not going to come apart? So I think there's a different level of challenges, but I would say the rough skill set is the same, like using the same materials, using contact cement to glue things, the Dremel, foam, all of that stuff. That axe was so much fun. I still, it's one of those things that I walk into the room that I have all my costume stuff in, and I just look at it and I go, oh my God, I made that. Like, I did that. That still doesn't seem real. I think that's part of why I love it so much, is it's like that magic that you know, a lot of us had when we were kids, of just really, like, you know, playing dress up and, you know, being free. And this is a really fun way to do it as an adult, and you have a better skill set, so you can make cooler things than when you're younger.
And more of a budget for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Allowance versus like 40-hour-a-week pay, totally different spectrums.
One thing I'm curious about is where do cosplayers generally sit in the fandom? Because we know they're very visible. We know they're an active part. Are they big consumers of the media itself, or do they just sort of pick and choose? How does that work?
I think it really depends on the cosplayer and what fandoms they really are into. I know for me, I'm definitely a consumer of like comics, especially DC, the Boys TV show, Titans, the movies. And I think everybody kind of has a different level of what they're consuming and how much they're consuming of that media, the kind of deeper level of the content. But I don't think so. I think most people end up cosplaying because they are so connected to the story they're reading or the movie they're watching, or you know, all of that. I think they do, cosplayers kind of do end up falling into an interesting category, because they're also bringing to life this media that, you know, they're entrenched in a totally different way, which I think is really fun.
It is neat. Like, another thing that I sort of noticed and realized with some of the cosplayers is that some of them are method actors. The one that comes to mind is amazing, by the way.
And those people who can get into that headspace, it amazes me. And I mean, it also makes sense that some of them would be method actors or actors or actresses in general, because their ability to kind of transform and embody that is so impressive.
It's kind of a moot point now with cons not being a thing, but normally, do you take your costumes to the cons?
So what's funny is, since I started cosplaying in 2019, I actually didn't have a chance really to take any of my stuff to any big cons. My partner and I went to the local one in 2019 November, and I wore my Tigress cosplay from Young Justice, Artemis Croc. But other than that, I haven't had any opportunity to go because of COVID, but I would love to when the world opens back up and it's safe to do so. I mean, it would just be great to be able to be in that environment and to kind of celebrate that creativity with other creatives. I think it'd be super fun.
What other types of art are you into?
I just recently started drawing with a digital tablet. Got that for my birthday. Finally got myself a tablet, and it's been amazing. I have been drawing since I was a little kid. And it's always kind of been in my life, but not really consistently. And I was sketching out some cosplay ideas on pen and paper, but it would take so long to get to that final result kind of the coloring and the finished piece that I was like, I just don't have time to sit here and do this. And finally, I was seeing so many amazing digital artists on social media, and I started looking into tablets, and I found one, and I really haven't looked back since. I've been drawing like 3 to 4 times a week. It's been so much fun to get back into that and have that as part of my life again.
That's awesome. Creativity is just so liberating, you know?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where the more you unlock it, it's almost a positive feedback loop. It's like the more you allow yourself to be creative, the more your creativity is like, okay, hey, we can come out and play now. And I know for me, it's really been that in a lot of ways, and it's kind of seeped into the rest of my life in a really positive way.
When you create, where do you find your zen? What emotional place do you work from?
Oh, that's such a great question, because I've been in a weird space lately where I was trying to just do too much. And it wasn't because of the rat race or anything like that. It was, I have so many things I'm so excited about, and I wanted to do them all at once. And my brain was just like, you actually can't do 5,000 things at one time. It's just not possible. So I kind of had to reassess and reprioritize how I wanted to approach everything. And today I was working on some armor stuff for Aricia Rab and Andy Curry. And I got into that space, like that flow state where I had music on, I was just dancing around, like as I'm cutting foam. And it was just so nice to be in that space again, because the past couple of weeks have just been a little off, and that happens. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing anything wrong or that your creativity is going away. And I had to keep reminding myself of that. There's an ebb and flow. And if you're not letting yourself recharge, your creative battery has nothing to give you. So, generally though, when I get into that really good space, it's so much joy. I mean, like today, just cutting foam in the garage, in socks and sandals and a giant sweatshirt, I was just happy as can be. So for me, it's really this place of joy. And I think that's something that we all need more of. And so whatever that is for each of us, cosplay or not, I think we all need a little more of that.
I'm personally a huge positive believer in positivity and joy and just spreading as much of it as you possibly can.
Honestly, your tweets make my day every day. They are always such a positive thing to see, and I appreciate them so much.
I really appreciate that. It's funny because at first when I started doing it, I didn't think anybody was actually paying attention to them. And then, people started chiming in and saying, oh, wow, this is really neat. Thank you. And it's kind of cool. It's hard keeping it original, though, just from day to day.
I think you do a great job. I always feel like it's a unique message. I love them so much.
Thank you. Does being involved with cosplaying change the way that you appreciate the art form?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I had admired it. I had admired it for so long, but you actually start trying to, turn flat rolls of foam into, a piece of armor or breastplate. It's really incredible. And I mean, you look at people too who've been doing it for, years and years, and you almost you're like, that can't even be real. Like, how are you doing it? And I think when you start working on things yourself, you have this, not a perspective shift, but I know for me, I went into it with a lot of confidence, which is good, but that also meant that when things went wrong, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure. And I was like, no, you're trying to learn a lot of new skills at once. And so I think for me, there's still so many things that I want to improve on and get better at. And there's cosplayers that I look at and I'm like, okay, I would love to know how they did that. And so I think it gives you a different perspective. The biggest thing for me is once I started cosplaying, the biggest moment of kind of that perspective shift for me was, how the hell are people attaching their armor? I was like, how is anything staying on anybody and like looking good? That was one of the biggest challenges for me, and it still is, but that would be the biggest example of kind of an eye-opener from the other side.
Nice. I like the way some of your cosplays pick on characters that not everybody else is doing. Like you did this one cosplay with Artemis in sort of the Wonder Woman getup, and that is not a character that everybody knows about, but it's awesome to see. It's just
oh, thank you. Every time I put on any of those orange wigs, I'm like, I'm dyeing my hair. I'm done. Like I want to have red hair again. Artemis is, if not my favorite DC character, in the top 3. She's just such a wonderful character. And I ended up, when I read her in Outlaws, I was like, she had to have existed before this. And so I bought all of Requiem, which is a 6-issue series just on her pretty much. And then the contest with her and Diana, which is actually when she becomes Wonder Woman. And I loved it so much. And I had grown to love her so much that any opportunity to do more cosplays of her was something I was going to jump on. And so now I have like 4 more planned for her. But the Wonder Woman one, I really wanted to make it unique because it, not even that it was something that had been done, because I don't know if it had been before I did it. I'm sure somebody has done it. But I wanted to give it a modernized twist. Like, what if she was our Wonder Woman right now? So I was able to use the Wonder Woman 84 look and then kind of build a base off that with touches that were more Artemis. So like she always has thigh-high boots on. So I was like, all right, thigh-high boots. And I made her crown a little bit more like her other head pieces. And it was just so fun to do. It was really fun to have that creative freedom with it. And I'm so glad you love the way it turned out, because I do too.
It's so cool. I think that was the first one of yours that I saw as I was scrolling through, and I was like, oh wow, that's just neat. Like I said earlier, I'm always just sort of just really impressed by just the artistry and the level of detail, and it's all just really interesting to me.
It's interesting to me too, as a like somebody who's even doing it, to see what other people are doing and to see what they choose to do or which characters they choose to bring to life is always cool for me, because it's fun. It's really fun to see characters who don't get cosplayed a lot, because when you do, you're like, oh yes, that character's getting some love. And that's how I feel whenever I see any other person cosplaying Artemis. I'm just so thrilled. I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody loves her as much as I do.
It's awesome. So what's your so what would be your advice to people who are looking at cosplay and just really, really impressed with it and totally in love with the art form, but they look at it and they think to themselves, oh wow, that's really hard. I don't know where to start.
For me, I was in that exact same space. So my advice would be, before I started, that's really the headspace I was in. And I would say, pick a character who you love, like head over heels love, relate to, connect to. You want to bring them to life. You want to embody them. Pick a character that you feel connected to. Don't pick something that you think is popular, going to do well on social media or anything like that. Like, pick something that connects for you. And so many YouTube tutorials. Look up all the YouTube tutorials on what you want to do, because there are so many amazing people who have made so many wonderful resources on there, as well as patterns. So many people have made patterns for common pieces, and then you can modify them from there. So you don't have to do this. You don't have to go in, from scratch. There's so many resources out there, and there's so many things that people have made to make it easier. So always, use those resources, seek them out. The other thing is, I'm really open to it. If anybody ever has any questions, they can always message me. I might not know the answer, but I will at least hopefully be able to point you in the right direction, or send you a tutorial that I've used in the past. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think a lot of cosplayers are more than happy to kind of share the craft and spread the love. I know that I've had so many people who have so graciously answered so many of my questions and made it a lot easier for me on my journey. So that would be my advice on that. And also just know that you're going to make mistakes, because you're learning a ton of new skills. There's no way to go into something and not fail a little bit, And I think for me, I think of every time I failed, yeah, it sucked, but I've gotten so much out of that failure. So just know that mistakes are normal. You'll probably throw some stuff away, and ask a lot of questions and use your resources, because there's so many of them.
Is it an expensive hobby?
It really is. You can make it less expensive. A lot of what I do is, if for fabric pieces, since I can't really sew at this point in time, I try to thrift as much as I can. One, to, kind of reduce waste, and two, because generally, you can find pretty similar thrifted stuff. Sorry, one sec. Find pretty good thrifted stuff that's close to what you need, or sometimes exactly what you need. So I would say thrifting can help with that. I generally buy extra foam I buy foam in a bigger shipment just because if you buy a certain amount, you get free shipping. So, try to kind of save based off that, but it does add up. And so it's definitely something that if you do need to keep a lower budget, it can totally be done. You really don't need all the fancy, you don't need an airbrush painter. You don't need a fancy camera. Most of my photos, if a photographer is not tagged, is taken with my phone, either by me or by my boyfriend, who, bless his soul, is so patient. So you don't need all the fancy stuff to be a cosplayer. You really don't. You just need the love for it. And I was going to say creativity, which sounds so lame, but I meant it more is creative solutions when you come across a problem. Because they're out there and you can definitely do it in a less expensive way, but it can also be very expensive if you do want to spend that money.
Does 3D printing play a role in your cosplays?
So that's just recently something I've started utilizing. I think the first 3D printed piece I got was my Iraq scythe for my warrior Daenerys cosplay, this concept I created. I think I actually sent you one of those pictures in the blue chainmail top, scale mail top. That was a 3D printed piece kit from Etsy that I then assembled and painted. I myself do not have a 3D printer, but I really do like those pieces. And one of my friends printed me my Red Hood helmet and the guns and the batarangs, which I will be debuting that so soon. And I'm so excited. They're some of my favorite pictures ever. But those were, I am like over the moon. Like I got the photos and I was like, that's not me. That can't be me. That's me. Oh, okay. So, but the 3D printed pieces, they're just a totally different type of prep. So with foam, you're dremeling, you're assembling with contact cement, all this stuff. With 3D printed pieces, you're priming, you're sanding, you're filling in cracks with spot putty. It's just a different prep process, but the pieces look really, really nice when they're done. It's definitely something I'd incorporate more. I mean, I'm thinking for a future Artemis project, she has a couple daggers, and I'm thinking, it might be nice to get those 3D printed instead of making them from foam. So it's a great resource as well. And people make files for everything. So, it's just impressive what all is out there.
Yeah, it really is. I think somebody created a file for it was this crazy axe from Warhammer. And it was just ridiculous. And you can actually download it and print it out piece by piece on any 3D printer.
It's amazing to me, people who can break down something that complex and massive into those little small pieces. Like that is something that is really hard for me to wrap my head around. I'm always like 3D printing as a whole, and the people who create those patterns blow me away.
Do they ever, okay, so you've done a little bit of 3D printing. Do the pieces ever come out in ways that you don't expect them to?
So I don't have a 3D printer myself, but my friends who do, I've seen a lot of mishaps. Sometimes they seem to have a mind of their own. I think if they're complex machines, right? I mean, which makes sense, but I feel like once humans get a certain technology, we expect it to be flawless from then on. And so, I feel like it's like when Wi-Fi isn't working, we're like, why isn't the Wi-Fi working? And then, but the 3D printers, I think, can be finicky, especially because the filaments, you can use different types of filaments and you can set it to different speeds. And then you have if it gets too hot, that can melt the filament. And I feel like it's a whole can of worms to open up when something does go wrong. And I've definitely heard from a few of my friends that it can be a frustrating process, but when it works, it's really rewarding.
Nice. So you're also a big comic book reader. What's your earliest memory of comics?
My earliest memory of comics, which is very ironic considering, not that I don't like Marvel. I do like Marvel. I grew up more on DC. So I have more of a connection to them, but I really need to pick up some Marvel comics because I've loved the movies and I love the characters. It's just, I always want to make it clear because there's that whole DC versus Marvel thing. I'm like, can't we just enjoy both? But my earliest memory is actually a She-Hulk comic book that my grandpa got me. I must have been 7 or 8. And I remember being so frustrated because it was only one issue. So like, it ended in some sort of cliffhanger. And I wish I still had it. It might be in storage somewhere. That is my earliest memory of anything comic related. But I also watched a lot of the DC animated shows. And at that point in my life, when I was 7 or 8, I didn't totally understand DC and Marvel were different. And so I think when I started seeking stuff out, I just happened to come across DC more. And that's kind of how I ended up going down that path. But that is my earliest memory, is that She-Hulk comic book. And I feel like at some point I need to cosplay her because I feel like that would just be a nice full circle.
That would be fun. It's a ton of makeup, though.
Oh my gosh, I know. And the body paint thing is so tough. That has been one of the biggest challenges for me cosplay wise. I mean, it's just a whole different mountain to climb.
I'm curious about that. Do you do it with like airbrush or what's the procedure there to like get yourself, turned purple?
Yeah, so I think for me, I have never used an airbrush, but I would imagine that it would be a lot easier and quicker to get it applied and to get it applied evenly. I think overall that would be a better course of action, but you almost I think you would need a second person for that. It'd be hard to kind of airbrush yourself, but for me, I luckily had so many people to turn to ask for advice, did a lot of test runs. So Starfire was the first I ever did body paint for. And for her, I actually mixed the body paint with lotion and then rubbed it on, which did use more body paint because it watered it down, but it was pretty easy application. And because orange is closer to a normal skin tone than like blue or green or something, I think it blended okay. If I had done that with green for Poison Ivy, I don't think it would have worked at all. So that was the first time I did it. I did the lotion method, and then I was like, okay, that wasted so much paint, not doing that again. So what I've done now in the future is I have applied with a sponge, and you do a couple layers and you let it dry fully between each layer, and then you can do your makeup over it. The other thing that I know people do for things that aren't, if you're not going to a convention, I've done this for a lot of my shoots recently because, it's just me. Nobody's, maybe my neighbors are seeing me, but nobody else is seeing me. So it really doesn't matter if my face is orange and the rest of me isn't. And then editing yourself orange or whatever color you need to be. I had a friend who was kind enough to edit me, the rest of me green for my Poison Ivy photos. I just did my face for that shoot, which is really nice because it saves time and paint.
Is there a business model to cosplaying, or do you approach it more as just a labor of love?
I think, because there are people who do approach it as a business, and I have a Patreon, and I have, avenues that I guess you could say are more business-y. But it never started that way for me. It really has always been coming from a place of just joy and passion and love. And it, I'm always touched when anybody wants to support me financially. But I think for me, I don't know if I could ever really have it be a full-time thing. I wouldn't want the love to get sucked out of it. And I think some people can definitely keep that passion when it's their full-time thing. I just don't know. I don't know if I would be one of those people who could do that, but I think that for cosplay as a whole, if you're gonna do it as a business, you really have to be like on it all the time. And sometimes that's hard with creativity. Sometimes you're just not in that headspace to create. And so I think it can be a big challenge, but it's definitely doable. I actually am a patron of like 3 or 4 people who I just think are just incredible creators. And I love seeing their behind the scenes, and they're doing a fantastic job with it.
Yeah, you mentioned Gracie earlier. I love her so much. She is amazing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, she's just the sweetest person.
Tried to get her to come on the show, but we couldn't get scheduling worked out, unfortunately.
Oh man, that's a bummer.
If she's listening, though, I'd love to have her at some point. That would be amazing. That would be cool.
Yeah, Gracie.
This is great. So what are you reading right now?
Guys, I have been given a couple recommendations from friends for some indie comics that I want to start reading. I wrote one of them down just because I want to start it this weekend. One of my friends recommended Solo Leveling, so I'm going to see if I can get some of those issues because he said it was really good. And I kind of want to branch out and read a little bit, open the horizon in that sense. So that's kind of what I'm reading there. I was reading Justice League Odyssey and I fell off of it and I need to get back on that, as well as Deceased. And then I have a couple poetry books that I'm working my way through right now. So Nikita Gill is the poet, and Fierce Fairy Tales and Great Goddesses. I have both those books that I kind of read a little bit of each morning. And then I just picked up Genesis by Courtney Lay, which is a sci-fi post-apocalyptic novel. So I just started that and it's super good so far.
So what's your favorite comic book series or character of all time?
Oh, that's so hard. I mean, so tough. Can I give you my top 3 characters and I'll pick one comic run?
You got it. You can do that.
Okay. So top 3 characters are Artemis from Outlaws, Andy Curry from Future State Aquaman. She took one of those spots like that, like lightning. I loved her immediately. And then Dinah Lance, Black Canary, is the first hero I ever fell in love with, and I love her so much. So those are my top 3 characters. I'm going to say Requiem, Artemis Requiem, as my top comic run at this point in time. It was just really cool to see Artemis get her own story, and it was also really cool to see her character be so true to her character, even when it was just her. Like, I feel like sometimes side characters, when they get shifted into a main role, sometimes their personalities change a little bit as the writers flesh them out, and that's totally valid and understandable and a normal thing. But I just loved how clearly Artemis was still very much Artemis in this run that was kind of all her own. And I own all 6 issues of that, and whenever I do that cosplay, I want to try to recreate all the covers, which is probably insane, but that's okay. We'll just gloss on by that.
Nice. Are you ready for the fun part of the show?
We were already having fun, but sure.
Well, we're always having fun, but this is
true.
The extra fun section where I get to ask you all the speculative and fun questions. So, are you a cat person or a dog person?
Oh, both my babies are in the room right now. How am I supposed to answer that? I love you both. I love you both equally. I was a dog person for most of my life, and then when my partner and I got together 4 years ago, he has a 22-pound Maine Coon cat named Tigger, and he is now my baby, and I love him so much, and he's amazing. And I never disliked cats, but I never owned one, so I categorize myself as a dog person. So, but I really don't think I can choose. I love them both so much. They're just so different. They're just such different animals. And our cat is 22 pounds and Chewy is 7 pounds, the dog. So it's a very comical situation.
Do you have a favorite food?
Ooh, I know this is super basic, but I could eat pizza at any time, any day, ever, like always. Pizza is my go-to, but I also really like ramen.
I don't think that's basic at all. Pizza's wonderful.
It is. And I feel like, I just feel like it was my comfort food growing up. And so I think it's just stayed that way. But yeah, you can't go wrong.
Oh yeah. And it's so creative. So like if you get tired of one kind of pizza, you can always have something else and still have it be pizza.
Exactly. That's when people are like, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be? I'm like, pizza. You could make a breakfast pizza. You could make a dessert pizza. You have so many choices.
That's really true. So, what's the best swear word?
Oh, I love that question. Oh, that's so hard. So my favorite phrase I've ever heard anybody say is "what the fucking fuck," and I just thought that was so funny. I was like, I think I burst out laughing, and I believe the same friend also said "what the freaking fuck," and I was like, well, then why are you even saying the freaking part? And she was like, for emphasis. So I would say both those phrases have got to be up
That's
there.
awesome. I love that. Okay, so one morning you wake up and you're imbued with superpowers. What are those powers, and what do you choose to do with them?
Oh man. So my original character that I've cosplayed, I don't know if I've posted her on Twitter. I'll have to after this. Her name's Queen. She is actually, I have a whole tattoo of her on my hamstring. And I think I would have her powers because she was kind of like an idea of what in high school when I made her up. It was kind of, me putting myself into some sort of superpowered individual. So I would say I have the same powers as her, which she's ferrokinetic, so she can bend metal and control metal. And I feel like that would actually be a very useful superpower because, everything, there's metal all around us, all the time, every day. I feel like I could actually do some good with that, So that would be a fun one. And I would probably spend a lot of my time bending metal into like various weapons. I feel like that would be my pastime.
That does sound like fun. So do you see yourself as a hero or an anti-hero or something in between?
I think I'd be in between. I think I'd be somewhere in between. I couldn't see myself, being on like the Superman, like you're always, the hero, you're always good. Kind of that end of the spectrum, but I also don't see myself being on like, the Black Mask end of the spectrum, right? Like I think I'd fall somewhere in the middle. Probably around where, Artemis is. I think I'd kind of fall where she does, where she's still kind of doing her own thing, and she makes mistakes, and she sometimes doesn't make the best choice in every situation, but she's still doing everything she's doing with good intentions. I think that's kind of where I'd fall, because if you woke up with superpowers, you're bound to make a few mistakes.
Okay, so 100 years from now, NASA takes all of the pictures of your cosplay, all the art you've created, and they throw it into a space capsule and launch that space capsule into deep space. Sometime later, aliens find it. What do they think of it?
Oh my gosh, I love these questions so much. These are like the most fun questions I've ever been asked in my whole life. I think they would think that I think they might think that wherever it came from, people just could shapeshift. I think that's what they would think, because you get the same, you would be able to tell it's the same person, but you'd be like, I feel like they would wonder, they'd probably wonder why, right? They'd be like, why is this a thing? Why has she changed her look so many times? Is she a spy? Is she dangerous? I feel like they would think there was a purpose behind it beyond just like having fun. I feel like they try to analyze it in some sort of way. Maybe this species, or maybe they're shapeshifters. I feel like that might be what they would think. And they like to use a lot of weapons. What are they violent? What is happening?
Nice.
This one has a giant, axe. I think they might be a little concerned.
Well, Brooke, you have been just the most absolutely charming guest, and I wanted to thank you for coming on my humble little podcast.
Thank you for having me. As soon as I saw your tweet, I was like, oh, me, I would love to. Pick me. So I'm so glad you enjoyed having me, because I enjoyed being here.
Great. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on Instagram as Tatted Khaleesi, one word, Twitter, tatted_Khaleesi. My website is www.tattedkhaleesicosplay.com. I have portfolios of all of my work on there. So if there's a character you love that you've seen, there's a portfolio for them. You can find me on there. You can find me on Patreon under Tatted Khaleesi as well. and on Vero as Tatted Khaleesi. So I'm kind of all over. If you search Tatted Khaleesi, I will probably come up.
And that's it, my babies. It's time to close the show. I wanted to thank you for being amazing, being awesome, being gorgeous, and living your best life. You're beautiful, and we couldn't do this humble little podcast without you. Hey, do you feel like supporting the show financially? It's super easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/EvaIsAdorable, because I am. You could donate as little as $1, and everything we raise goes towards the cost of producing and hosting this podcast. Every little bit helps. If you can't help us financially, it would be awesome if you could share this episode on Twitter or Instagram and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to follow me at Eva is Adorable on Twitter for the latest and greatest updates, show announcements, and daily hugs and affection, because that's what I do. This show is part of Batch 34. Titular Characters is a show about the things we love. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me. You might have noticed the dreamy announcer guy at the beginning of the show. That's our friend Donnie Underwood. Just love that guy. Our opening theme was written and produced by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. And that's it. That's all we got. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. Oh, and when you come by, bring candy. Love yas.